Supposed to start. Welcome and good evening. My name is Tom Burdett. I'm with the City of Bothell. Thank you all for participating in tonight's meeting. Let me just take a brief moment to introduce some of the key people who are going to be facilitating tonight's meeting. I'll start with our city staff and Gary Hassler, who's our planning manager, Bruce Blackburn, who's our senior planner, and Chris Sorensen, who's a planner for us, recently hired this past Christmas, yeah. 2 months. Out in the hallway, Julie Ewick and Leslie Ryan Zink, and they're helping check people in. Appreciate their assistance tonight. With our parametrics team, we've got Darren Sandino, Paul Fent, and Ben Burke. Now, finally, we'll introduce Kirsten Green with Kogan, Owens and Green, and Nadine Appenbrink with Friganassi and Associates. A couple of things to cover before we get started. Staff and consultants who are here tonight are going to present some technical information, recover in a brief summary some of the ground and things we covered at the last meeting, summary. They're going to provide a framework for exploration of alternative policies and recommendation, which will eventually lead into recommendations for implementation tools. They have no preconceived outcomes. Staff and consultants are facilitators of these stakeholder meetings, and we respect your time and greatly appreciate how important it is, and we're very appreciative that you're taking the time to participate in these meetings. There's kind of a little bit of background that I should give from a executive level. One is we took the City Council 3 options for conducting further work with the Fitzgerald area. And one of those options was just to leave the plan and code as it is today, not take any effort to change the regulations or the plan. We took them, a second option was to provide an analysis and make recommendations through the standard code and plan amendment process. And then the third option was to provide enhanced public engagement ahead of the standard code and plan and code amendment process. And unanimously, the City Council selected the latter and said we would be remiss if we didn't extend an enhanced public information process to the Fitzgerald area. So they're dedicated, the council is dedicated to coming forward with some additional public involvement. We're hoping that this effort is not only deserving of your time, but also is recognized and appreciated by the council when we deliver the results of this process. Lastly, there are kind of 3 technical points that I need to cover. First one is that this is a stakeholder focus group feedback process, and it's one of the methods that's recommended in public involvement in the Growth Management Act. And for those who missed the first workshop, this enhanced public engagement should not be construed as mediation in a legal sense. Mediation in a legal context really would have attorneys representing various parties probably include a mediator who has a legal background, and that process would be much differently facilitated than this process. So I think rightly so, the City Council wanted to seek your opinions and your thoughts on this area without looking at it as an adversarial kind of thing, where people can have to participate in arguing, aspects of the Growth Management Act or other parts of environmental law that may have some bearing on these cases. So the second one is that I want everybody to recognize that the Growth Management Act requires local governments to plan for growth. And it further states that urban growth areas must be designated to accommodate future urban growth. Bothell is an urban growth area, and which side of the issue of growth and environment you're on, it is important to recognize that it is an urban growth area, and Bothell is charged to plan for that area. Thirdly, we appreciate the comments that have been provided to date. Feedback is healthy to our process. It's healthy to the council. We respect all of the feedback we've received, and we'll include it in all summaries that we share back with the council. Consultants are sharing a toolbox of standards and techniques that are used by cities in Puget Sound, and then they're soliciting your opinions. We really want to hear back from you. So to date, up to this point, we have some technical components of best available sciences and low impact developments. We've put those out on the website. You just go to the Bothell website, go to the planning and zoning portion of that website, and you can access this material. We do not anticipate, nor do we have a budget for an elaborate data-driven hydrographic model that compares a range of different solutions. If that was not part of the scope of services for parametrics, and we haven't been given a budget to do that kind of level of detailed analysis. So the first workshop focused on best available science and low impact development overviews. This workshop is going to start considering a range of solutions that would appropriately fit in the Fitzgerald area, and a couple of final recommendations. And one is that great solutions going forward are born out of collaboration, and this may necessitate a degree of compromise to reach a positive solution going forward. And lastly, please respect other people's point of view. Listen to others, and everyone's opinion is valid. So I'll turn the time over to Kirsten Green, and we'll get started.
Thanks a bunch. So fortunately I have a microphone on so I can wander around a little bit. But thank you, Tom, and thank you everyone here, because there's no way to have an enhanced public engagement process without the community. So really value you taking time out of your days. So I'm a facilitator and a planner. I specialize, mentioned this last time, in helping communities find solutions to complex environmental challenges. You all are a part of that, and I trust that everyone here will help us reach our objectives, which are to increase our shared understanding of the challenges from each other's perspective. So it's helpful tonight if you can put yourself in each other's shoes. We know we have common values of, respecting property rights and the environment and the sensitive natural conditions we have here, and working to support each other towards, as Tom mentioned, working towards acceptable solutions so we can move forward and everyone can get back on with their lives. This is not a public hearing. You'll notice it's not set up as a public hearing. We do have breakouts tonight, so we'd like to get you up close and personal with some of the tools in a scenario that we've designed to, as I say, help each other reach this shared understanding of the challenge of how to actually find value in one's property while protecting and enhancing the environment. So we'll be doing that tonight. You can see that on the agenda. Tom mentioned please hearing each other out. You can make sure your cell phones are off while in this room, but please feel free to come and go. The bathrooms are just down the hall. And bring your best participatory self. The creativity is rewarded tonight, so in the breakouts we'll have staff and consultants facilitating, but we're looking for creative solutions that help demonstrate how the city could develop a code going forward that would best meet all needs. So I think I have just a few slides here as well before turning it over to the technical team. So we mentioned this on your agenda. We'll be recapping the technical memos. Some of you have provided very in-depth comments, and thank you on those. We're asking for all comments to be back by the end of Memorial Day weekend on May 31st. So if you haven't taken a look at those yet, they are on the City of Bothell's website under Community Development, I believe. We'll hear an example. We're very fortunate to have Tom Campbell in the room with us, who will share an example from Clearwater Commons. And we'll be talking about this small group discussion scenario. We'll hear back from each other after that and then do some group polling on the tools and the application strategies. Of course, our next meeting is June 9th, so just in a couple weeks. Tom mentioned the series of workshops. You'll receive this notice, but tonight we're considering the range of solutions appropriate to the sub-area. So if there are some that you think are either missing or not included and should be, please let us know. And tonight's presentation, you'll hear in this order, just a recap on the best available science, the low impact development tools. We'll again discuss that scenario, discuss the regulatory approaches, and work together to find the best solution. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce Paul Fent with Parametrics. He'll just recap where we were at our last meeting and set us up for our discussion tonight. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. So I do want to, if you've been here before, you've seen all these things. And so I just want to kind of reinforce or look back at these, and because these are going to be topics that are going to come up again. So the first thing is looking at the areas. You see the 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Those are just different combinations of the sub-area and the drainage basins and so on. And what we're focused on is, of course, the Fitzgerald area, which is included in 1, 2, and 3. And this is a map of the existing forest land cover. So in the context of just from a planning perspective, if we want to understand how much forest is in that area, this map is where we get our information and what represents, and the specific areas that are represented by forest. Second important piece of information is impervious surface. This again is a data set from the Geographic Information System, and it shows the existing impervious areas in the same in the Fitzgerald area and so on. The third thing that we'll see or we'll talk a little bit about is this is the hydrologic soil groups, and what this is and what this is for, and what it means is these are areas that tend to be more preferred or less preferred for doing low impact design. So it gives us kind of our first indicator on whether or not low impact design is something that will generally work or generally is expected to work or generally expected maybe to not work. And we categorize all our soils by either an A, B, C, or D. A being very good soils that infiltrate well, and D being somewhat poor soils that tend not to infiltrate well or have really high groundwater, and so that the water can't go into the ground. The colors you see up here, that's the dominant color here, which is kind of I guess an orangish color, is all soil group C. And C tends to be a type of soil that is not great for infiltration, and usually have to go site by site to find out whether or not stormwater will infiltrate into the ground and whether or not low impact design is reasonably expected to be effective there. The good colors are the lighter green, the turquoisey color. That's a soil group A, and those tend to be soils that infiltrate very well. The green, kind of olivey color or pea green, is soil group D, which tend to be poor soils. And you'll notice that if you can kind of understand or follow where the streams are, we have the poorer soils close to the streams because the water table is high. We have the good soils on the hilltops away from the streams. So this is a summary of, in the different areas, about how much of each of those things, or how many acres, or what percentages of each of those three things on the maps are in the Fitzgerald area. So if we focus on that row that's Fitzgerald area, it's about 590 acres. And in that area right now, according to that data we have, there's about 36% in current forest cover. It's about 20% impervious. And then the A and B soils, B I didn't mention because there's no Bs in there, but the A's and B's are good soils that tend to be, are typically suitable for low impact design. So that's in acres, it's under 10%. So we talked a little bit last time about what low impact design is, and that it's a series of tools to help us manage stormwater from sites and manage the way we develop sites. And this is important for leading into the scenarios that we're going to work on at the tables. And in general, we're saying that low impact design measures that are equivalent to a forest are bioretention or rain gardens or dispersion. A bioretention or rain garden is a depression in the ground, usually has plants in it other than grass, where stormwater can infiltrate. Dispersion tends to be a strip of vegetation where if the water runs off of an impervious surface, goes into this dispersion area and infiltrates into the ground, so it isn't a concentrated water. There's a number of other LID measures that we are saying at this point are not equivalent to a forest, so we can't just automatically assume they are equivalent. And they are things like permeable pavements, which are pavements that the water can leak through, or they're pavers that have holes in them. Downspout controls, they may be effective, but it's generally wells that are at the bottom of your downspouts. Soil quality and depth is more of a protection measure, meaning that if you have good soil on the site before you develop, you want to maintain it so that you don't lose the positive properties of the soil. Vegetated roofs, it's basically what it says. It's putting plants on your rooftop, holding water there so it doesn't become impervious. Maximum, I'm not going to explain the other one. Water reuse to the next one, but water reuse is basically collecting water in cisterns. Oops. So this is a diagram that it gives you an example of what kind of things are impervious surfaces and what kind of things are not. All the yellow items in there, driveways, roofs, sidewalks, patios, streets, those are typically impervious surfaces. So an important concept to understand is there's a difference between impervious surface in general and what we call effective impervious surface. So impervious surfaces in general are anything that we described in the picture before. Effective impervious surfaces are areas where the stormwater that falls on them runs into a drain, into a ditch, into a pipe, and goes right to a stream. And those are the ones that matter, the effective impervious surfaces. Those are the ones that are affecting the stream and the stream hydrology. So I'm going to briefly talk about, there's really three scenarios we'll be talking about, we can discuss in the breakouts and so on, but they're really not detailed scenarios. I don't want you to get involved deeply into the numbers, but to recognize that these are, they provide the range or the extents of choices. There's kind of one in the middle and there's one on either side. So this one that we call current forest cover, if you remember on the top there, we said, well, it's already 30-some% forest cover, 20% impervious. Some area, some part of the development or the areas is already critical areas. So what does that leave? It leaves about 32% for what we could say is development. So the idea behind this one is to retain and keep what we have and develop what's already been changed or converted. So if it's not forest right now, that becomes a priority development. And one thing I should say about all these is that low impact design standard or how it performs is the same for all these scenarios. So basically, no matter which one of these scenarios you're talking about, we're expecting the same amount of water to come out at the end of them. So this one is basically keep the good hydrologic things like forests the same. This one is basically put the forest back. So that the idea is that we have 38% forest. We're short 27% for the 65-10 rule we explained last time. So we have to go build some more forests, and whatever's left can be impervious surface and development. And the third one is where it doesn't matter what it is now, it doesn't matter what's going to happen out there, is the idea is you can do whatever you need to do out there and develop it in any way possible, but you still have to meet the runoff performance. So you can use all the forest, 0 to 100%, you can retain all of it that's there, you can use all of it as long as you're providing some measure to control the stormwater from it. It's the same measures you apply everywhere else, but you're not specifically protecting a forest or a critical area or any other area. So you can see there's a range. Restore the forest, do whatever you need to do to develop, keep it the way it is. So somebody else is going to talk about this.
I think that's back to me. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Paul. So folks, we will have a chance to ask the scientists and the city team questions in the group discussions, but I'll just explain what's coming before us, which is a scenario, and Darren Sandino kindly developed this for us. It's not supposed to be in Fitzgerald, but it could be like what you might find in Fitzgerald. So about approximately a 5-acre site. Please don't get caught up in the exact scale and measurements, but you can see it has different attributes you might find in Fitzgerald: steep slopes. You need to access the site somehow. It has existing trees, stream buffers, and wetlands, and we'll be asking you in the group discussions to conceive of how you could apply the LID tools that we've been hearing about. So you'll have these cards at your tables. The purpose is to explore the range of options, including development. So you have sticky notes to figure out where you might put the development on the site and how those LID tools might interplay with that impervious cover. Tell you how you could offset those hardscape surfaces of roofs and streets, etc. Part of the purpose is to challenge ourselves, welcome, and to inform the code development that is in front of us. So just mentioned, there's each of the tables will have steep slopes, wetlands, and creek. Do propose some development. Everyone has a right and entitlement to develop their property to some extent, and apply LID tools to reach. Really what we're aiming for is this very conservative 10% net effective impervious area, so very little unmitigated hardscape. So before we adjourn to our tables, Ben Burke will take us through some regulatory broaches. Now this is a shift from the LID tools. There's really two things we're talking about tonight: LID tools and how they apply to the site, and then also how might the city code for this. So this is a second question we'll be asking in the groups. Ben.
So as we mentioned, this is a little bit of a shift from the way we approached this originally, and it was in direct response to some of the feedback we got from the last meeting that talks about wanting potentially some more tools. So just to kind of reinforce the design, or the, kind of where we are today, the city has environmental regulations that apply to the entire city and also apply to Fitzgerald. Back in, during previous studies, there was additional best available science review and engagement, and the decision was made that the critical areas in this area required additional protection. And so there have been a couple different approaches that have been applied to that. One was larger lot zoning, and then the change was made to a low impact development overlay. So up until the last meeting, our approach was addressing the low impact development overlay. And as a result of the last meeting, people talk about having some more options. And so we kind of went back, sharpened our pencils a bit, refocused things, and said, well, what are some additional potential regulatory solutions if the decision was made to go that direction? What would we be looking at? And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time, since we didn't talk about this at the last meeting, kind of framing those approaches in the same way that we framed the low impact development, because really it's very similar. So for regulating critical areas, you have basically a prescriptive approach, which is very, very similar to what the city's doing now. So you have rules and regulations and standards, and that if you meet those, you get your project approved. There's also a demonstrative approach, which is just like on the stormwater side, two different extremes, where basically you say, well, we don't have a particular requirements or standards, you just have to show you're not going to have an adverse impact on the environment, and the environment can be whatever elements of the environment you want. And as an example, prescriptive is a lot what we do in Washington, our critical areas codes and under the Growth Management Hearings Board. A more demonstrative approach is more what they do in California, where they have developments that don't have a lot of rules, and they make the developers go out and do a bunch of studies and spend a lot of time analyzing the impacts and arguing about it, and usually a lawsuit involved about, is that worth it? And then someone at the end makes a decision, and this is done. And then they do it again on the next property, and then the next property. So we have a little different approach in Washington, but there are other options that are completely valid. So what are some of the prescriptive approaches that we can choose to either enact or tweak or change? Zoning. We've already done this a little bit in this where we had large lot zoning. We've changed the zoning, but we can go back and look at the zoning again if that's something that we're directed to do. We go ahead and we develop standardized critical areas buffers. So one of the options would be we can investigate whether we want to change the ones that are currently approved for the sub-area. Again, an additional measure to provide additional protection. We can identify specific allowed uses. This is what King County does. It says in this area, with this critical area, you can do this, but not anything else. Be very, very prescriptive on what kinds of development, in addition to zoning, we do. We can look at what I call standardized mitigation requirements. Your current code already has these. It says if you impact X amount of wetland or stream or buffer or whatever, you have to replace Y amount, and there's a ratio that varies. And we can discuss whether that ratio should be increased or whether we should put mitigation ratios on other things. I talk about this quite a bit in the memo that's online if you want to go ahead and read that. The other thing, which is a prescriptive approach, is an in lieu of fee program or mitigation banks that basically says you have to pay into this fund if you want to do your development, and it's a prescribed solution. So what are some of the advantages and potential disadvantages of this approach? Everything has trade-offs. One of the big advantages, and one of the reasons that most of Washington does it this way, is because the best available science issues, screening and making sure that it's compliant, is addressed up front during the code development and adoption. The city has already done this as part of all the previous work that's been done. They did it as part of the critical areas code and as part of the current regulations in the sub-area. So that's already been taken care of. Okay. One of the other advantages is there's a high level of, and I'm not going to be able to go through this, I'm getting a wave on time, but is predictability. You can look at the rules and regulations and have a high level of confidence that you're going to get a particular level of development, or it's going to take X amount of time, or you're going to have to spend X amount of dollars, and that's another benefit. Some of the disadvantages. It is prescriptive. So if you don't have a property that works real well with it, you can have non-conforming parcels. If we have big wetland buffers, there could be parcels that are completely in a buffer, and then what are you going to do with them? And that can not always be a good thing because it can restrict future redevelopment that could be beneficial. It can disincentivize some creative solutions, which is hopefully we're going to talk about creative solutions tonight. And then one of the things that it also does is it standardizes development types. And I think we see that. You see certain types of development, and we're going to hear later on about another type of development, but our rules and regulations do drive a particular type of development because we know it works. Okay, the next one real quick. Some of the demonstrative approaches. You change this from more flexible zoning, but they have a concept called open zoning where you just have rules about what you can, building standards, and you don't have prescriptive requirements on zoning. They do that in some places. Variable critical habitat buffers. They do this in a lot of places in Washington where they say the buffer is X if you're going to build this, or Y if you're going to build that. It's an option. It's a little more complicated. Habitat management plans. This is what they do in Snohomish County. They basically say, well, if you're going to impact a buffer or critical area, you as the developer come to us and explain how that's not going to be an impact. And so the onus is on the developer. You can do a monitoring and adaptive management. This is much like Paul said. You can do, anything as long as you don't actually change the condition, but you have to then prove that you're doing that. And then the other thing would be like an integrated low impact development approach, which is very much like we're going to hear about the commons approach. I pushed it wrong. I'm not very good at this.
There you go.
So, I'm going
Oh, down. Go ahead, down. There you go. Down one more. Doop.
I'm going the wrong way.
Yeah,
Where's my slide?
I know it's there. I just saw it fly by. One more. Boop. There you go. Yeah.
So very quickly, some of the advantages. Obviously, if you have a demonstrative approach, the advantages are you have the maximum amount of flexibility possible. It allows for the highest level of theoretical densities. So you don't have the issue of non-conforming lots where you may have areas you can't develop just because of the rules. You can always change the rules a little bit to make it work. One of the biggest sort of advantages is, you know, that there's some degree of predictability because you have to show how you're going to demonstrate these things. Some of the biggest disadvantages. It's difficult to administer these at a small scale, like in the Fitzgerald area, because you have to, you know, if you're going to have stormwater experts and innovative design experts, the city doesn't necessarily have those people in staff, and it's difficult to hire them for a very small area. So you're going to be doing a lot of consultants and special third-party reviews, which is expensive and takes time. Longer submittal and review timelines, because it's not just, yes, you met the requirements, here's your permit. There's a higher risk of challenges in successful appeals because you don't get the same level of screening related to best of all science up front. And sort of the last one is that it may result, and this is oftentimes understood, in a higher level of mitigation or lack of development to address uncertainty. So you can go into this negotiation of all this flexibility, but it may not come out in your favor because the regulating agencies might say, well, unless you can show me how you're going to do this to a high level of certainty, you're going to have to do more than you otherwise would under the prescriptive approach. And that's sort of the main disadvantage. I think that's it for my part.
Great, thanks, Ben. So we will be asking you about that, your personal preferences on that in the groups, and then again at the end in the polling. So again, really pleased to have Tom Campbell here, developer of Clearwater Commons and really one of the original architects of the Growth Management Act in Washington. So thanks for joining us tonight. Nadine's just bringing up a few slides about his applications.
This one forward. Well, good evening, neighbors. How are you? Great to be out here in our wonderful city of Bothell. I only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to be fast. I think you've got some interesting challenges of what to do about being, whether it's predictable. I'm the builder and developer of the Clearwater Commons, and I was one of the first to go through Snohomish County's ordinances, which were very difficult to manage and took a lot of time because everything was a deviation from the existing standards, so you had to demonstrate what you were trying to accomplish and why it made sense. We are sharing North Creek. We are right on North Creek, and I'll show you the plan. Our goal was, when we bought this property, it was slated for a 9-lot short plat subdivision, and we upzoned it to 19 units by doing this low impact development. So it gave us some additional incentives to be able to build more, but also to build in a more compact way. So these were the things that we believed in, was how could we manage against all these different goals of restoring the creek. We're very involved in community education about salmon. We wanted something that was pedestrian friendly and community oriented, conserving energy, and using some of the best practices for low impact development. If I had a pointer, it'd be helpful here, but this is our site plan. So if you look at the middle, this is a 7-acre site. So if you look at the middle portion is 2.3 acres. So that's the developable land that we had to work with. So the one to the north is a class 3 wetland because it drains into North Creek. The one to the south borders right on North Creek, and you have a stormwater management area. But what's interesting about it is that we were able to kind of do both, is to build intensively but also protect through a conservation easement and be able to do a very large salmon restoration project as part of this. So when you're looking at low impact development, you have to, as I just showed you, what are your development goals? What are you trying to accomplish with the piece of property in your community? How can you conserve the natural areas, which are some of the challenges that you're looking at with the ordinance and some of the trade-offs there? In low impact development is very much a minimal site disturbance. We're not trying to cut and scrape it because you want to retain the viability of those soils. You want to minimize impervious coverage. You want to not have impervious areas disconnected. You want to make sure that things work together and maintain the overall site hydrology. And I could go into a long case study about site hydrologies and permeability of soils and all those things. But even any soil, I think, can work in a low impact development design as opposed to just having the best soils. So these were the methods that we used. It's called a zero discharge. Everything was managed on site. We had no detention ponds. None of our stormwater was tight lined into one of those, what I think are ugly detention ponds or vaults. We did minimal site disturbance. I'm going to show you all this very quickly so you see all these things that we did on this site. So we're probably the most comprehensive low impact development design in all of Washington State. So that's why we're often an example of what, and we are in your neighborhood. So it's a great opportunity to see how you can do it. So this is a rain garden in the right of way. The county actually has to maintain it in part way. So we got a deviation to enable we had to widen the street. So in order to widen the street, we wanted the water to run off into it. This little sign that says, do not mow. One day I ran out there, we planted everything, it was growing nicely. And what did the road crew do? They came in and mowed the whole thing down. So, you know, that's kind of what the right and left hand are doing. Can they actually remember that there's an LID, what a rain garden looks like, and not just a bunch of weeds? But when you think about investing in LID, it's not just that it looks pretty, it has to be functional, but it does create jobs for our teenagers who have to go out and help weed these things. This is where we widened the road. The bad part of this story is that the fire department wanted me to have a 27-foot road. That forced us into a wetland by 81 square feet, which meant that I had to have a Corps of Engineers permit. I said, can I just narrow the road for a little bit, you know, and the fire department can get by? No, no deviation for that one. But this is a green wall, so the plants grow in it, and it has enables more permeability. That's the name of it, a delta lock wall. This is our parking lot with plantings and mitigation. When the middle part of it's pervious concrete. That pervious concrete serves as a vault, so all the water, it's like 6 inches of pervious concrete and a foot of base, so it can store a lot of water runoff into it, so it serves both purposes. This is our fire lane. It's called drivable grass. Sometimes, you know, pervious concrete, other things are definitely used. But it, to me, is kind of a nicer than just having concrete through the middle of it. The grass and the weeds grow up in it. So it doesn't look like your standard button down community, but it's a little wilder, but has, I think, a nice flavor for us. This is looking at the pedestrian side of it going back through the commons. So that's an 8-foot. We can drive through it and park and do things, but most of the parking's out in the parking lot. With this is just so people can come through and do their own, drop off their groceries and stuff. So pedestrian communities are not for everyone. A lot of people like to have their garage and drive in it and shut the door. You know, where you like to see each other and be part of a community and recognize who's doing what. This is the pin foundation system that all of our homes are built on. I've done 7 of these. I would say that the costs are very similar to doing a concrete foundation. Especially if you know how to do the system right. This is that's built on already, so it's kind of a slope here, so you have to boost it up. But it's actually quite nice to be able to be on grade and be able to be kind of looking out into the forest and the like. This is a duplex that we built on the same site, not such a grade, and is a little bit less expensive to use the pin foundations. This is an infiltration trench that required, not only are you doing kind of built on, pin foundations give you a huge amount of stormwater credits. So it's almost like building is on impervious. So everything, all the hydrological functions are managed so the groundwater moves underneath the house. So it's kind of a fun system where you really don't impede the groundwater development. So it's not really an impervious surface. This is we have electric cars and a 9.2 kilowatt solar PV station with an electric charger, which we have 2 families that have that, and it's really nice not to have to go to the gas station all the time. This is North Creek during a major rain event. If those of you who live around North Creek or have seen it, when the headwaters are in the Everett Mall, and what happens is that when you get an inch of rain, with all the impervious surface, it just hits North Creek super hard, and it's very hard for the salmon eggs to stay, and for the salmon that, like Chinook, why they're endangered is that they need to stay in the creek for a year. So that's a very hard thing to manage against. These are much more common, as we know, with what's happening with the climate. But what we did was we opened up the creek floodplain and dug 2 back channels so that the flooding now is much more contained. These are large woody debris that are put in for salmon so that there's more ponding and habitat for them. So this is one of our 5, this is one of the spawning areas right there. That's a Chinook that was coming up and then spawned out right on our property. And it's really an amazing thing to continue to watch. So finally, I really believe that both green building and green low impact development is a positive thing. I think it's not just low impact development, it's how do you create positive impacts, both in terms of functions and values of the watershed, creating more community livability, supporting kind of the local building industry, and being able to reduce your energy impact. Did I do it in 10?
You did just fine, thank you. Excellent, folks. So now this is, really appreciate that. It's sort of a mind-blowing and inspiring example of how this can occur in real life and so close. Thank you. Joining us on short notice. So we have about the perfect, let me just give a little bit of instructions from when we get to you. We have about the perfect number for our discussions and our inquiry in the next phase. So we have folks, there'll be tables 1 and 6 here in this room. If you just check your name tag. So, I may not have changed it. 1 and 4, right? Yep, 1 and 4 in this room will be Tom, who you heard from, Darren, and Chris will be staffing those discussions. And we expect about 5 folks per site map, which is just perfect and not too crowded to play. And again, be creative. And how would you get your development on that site, and then mitigating with the low impact development techniques. Don't get too hung up on the soils, because as we know, they vary by condition. So if you have a 2 or a 5 on your name tag, please join us in the historic American Hotel room. It'll be Gary, Ben, and myself just right next door. And then through that door, the Main Street room. Is it better to go out and around, Gary, do you think, or just go through?
Either way.
Just go straight through or around. But for straight ahead Main Street folks, who if you have a 3 or a 6 on your tag, you'll be with Paul, Bruce, and Nadine. So just 1 or 2 questions, if you could, on clarification on what we're doing tonight. And again, you can have more time to discuss with the scientists at your table. But sir, you had a question or comment, please. Okay. And Suzanne, did you have any questions? I know you were scratching your head when you were thinking of this. Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I'm not entirely clear. We're getting a map.
Yep.
We're getting pictures of different LID technologies.
Yes. Yes.
And we're moving around the map.
Yes.
And what is that going to accomplish?
So you're aiming for 10%, or less, or no discharge. So in Clearwater Commons, you saw that he had 0 discharge off the site, and 10% impervious area. So try and mitigate any hardscape or pervious area on the site.
But we're not talking to each other
Yes.
about core issues that we're facing on the Fitzgerald area. So we're just moving pictures around, and I'm a little confused as to how that's necessarily going to create some productive dialogue.
Let's see how it goes. All right, why don't we take a break and move to your tables and see how that goes. Yeah, it is an inquiry. Let's see how it goes. Yep, no better time than the present. And your facilitators, are they ready to help you? Yeah. 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 That's right, use pervious pavement. Yep. All righty. Guess I can turn myself off now so I don't produce.
Watch yourself.
So how many trees did you have? See, we got lots of trees and we don't want to cut them down.
No, you can do it.
No.
Thank you guys. Thanks for suspending the sleep and joining us. Yeah. You know which one you are in?
Yeah. We don't want